Good afternoon and welcome to Planning for Transfer, a workshop for financial aid and scholarships. Today you will learn key information to guide you through the financial aid and scholarship process in advance of transferring. We are joined today by Nasim Reich, CCBC's Assistant Director for Financial Aid on the Essex campus and a true transfer champion. Nasim will go through her presentation and leave time at the end for questions and answers through the chat feature. Please know that this presentation will be recorded and available upon request. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Hello, CCBC students. I'm so glad that you could join us for Transfer Tuesday. I'm going to go through essentially the financial aid basics. We'll talk a little bit about CCBC, but more about the opportunities outside of CCBC. I would say this year the only feature, other than some changes in interest rates and amounts to the Pell Grant, there's been a lot of changes for undocumented students, and so we'll add that in this presentation. And of course, if you have questions, I know the transfer team is awesome and they will be more than happy to help you or guide you in the right direction. I will turn off my camera during the presentation. And again, as Anne mentioned, we'll take any questions at the end and she'll facilitate those questions. Thank you so much. The easiest way to apply for financial aid is the first step, actually, which is to complete the free application for federal student aid, which the URL is listed in the second bullet here. The FAFSA is available every year beginning October 1. So that's correct. 24 days ago, the 2023-2024 FAFSA became available for students to complete. So most of you as CCBC students who who have applied for financial aid would have completed a 22-23 FAFSA, which is this aid year now, which goes until summer. You would want to check with each of the schools that you're potentially interested in, or if you plan on coming to CCBC. And of course, we always encourage you to complete your associate's degree before you transfer. So if this is your first year and you will be coming to CCBC next year, you can complete your FAFSA for 2023-2024, but we don't begin processing financial aid until fall registration begins, and that won't be closer until March of 2023. All students do need to create a username and password for your FAFSA, what they call an FSA ID and password. So you can create that if you haven't already. Any independent students that are deemed independent anyway, by definition through the FAFSA. As an independent student, you don't need a parent FAFSA, parent signature. However, as a dependent, you will need one. Now, again, if you've already completed the FAFSA, then your one parent should have completed this. Now, any students who are interested in starting the financial aid process once they transfer, you would need to get, if you're a one parent household, then only that one parent is going to get their username and password. If you're a two-parent household, it still doesn't matter. Only one parent is required to get an FSA ID and password. If your parent happens to be a college student themselves and they apply for financial aid, they can actually use the same FSA ID and password that they used for themselves. All financial aid, and of course, because of the time constraints, we can't go in depth into all the financial aid and all the types and all the information and all the eligibility requirements. However, I provided the URL at the top here, which is studentaid.gov, and that's going to get you to the FAFSA. That's going to get you to FSA ID and password setup. That's going to get you to all the information about all the federal grants and programs and scholarships and grants and loans, and all the information that you know, if you don't retain through this presentation, you can certainly go back and reference it there. And typically, most financial aid offices have pretty robust financial aid websites. So you can go there, and I'm sure they'll have links also to this information. Frankly, there's really only two main grants that come from the federal government. The first one is the Pell Grant, and the Pell Grant is considered a federal entitlement, which means if you're eligible for this grant, it's free money and you don't have to pay it back. As of right now, I can only give you the Pell allotments for this year because they have not released that information for 2023-2024. However, a student who has, and again, we didn't go into the specifics of how Pell Grant is calculated, because again, we don't have enough time for that. But when students complete their FAFSA, a number is created from that submission. And that's what the federal government believes that your family can pay for school. And a student who has a zero expected family contribution number, or EFC, would be eligible for the maximum Pell Grant. And the Pell Grant is a proration system. So that means based on your number of enrolled credits, so you can be enrolled as little into one credit, all the way up to 12 or more. So you can be a less than half time, three-quarter time, or full-time student. However, your Pell Grant, based on your expected family contribution number and your enrollment, is going to be connected or prorated to that amount. So $6,895 is for a full-time student with a zero EFC. So again, there are Pell charts, and you can certainly come to the financial aid office. We'll be more than happy to give you a copy of a Pell chart. But the Pell chart, again, may change from year to year. So I can only give you that information for this academic year. The Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, or the SEOG, which is the second bullet, is something called campus-based funding. Essentially, what that means is that the federal government gives a lump sum of money to the school, and the school awards it on their behalf. So there could be different processes depending on each school. So a good question to ask a school that you might be transferring to is, how do they award SEOG, and when do they award it? Something we don't get into too much in these presentations is something that you would, of course, want to speak with the transfer group with, is early action and early decision. And those kinds of things do have an impact on when you should be completing your financial aid application and when this type of funding might be available to you. I do want to caution students who go to schools that cost more money and who receive very large SEOG grants in their award packages. The reason why I say this is because it's not guaranteed. So if you, let's say, for example, you graduate with your associate's degree and you're going to transfer to a four-year school, and they say, okay, we're going to give you $4,000 in SEOG money. Well, that's great for your third year, but what will happen in your fourth year, and potentially, maybe you need another semester or another year to finish if you're a double major, or you needed to take extra credits. Is that money guaranteed? And these are questions you really need to ask the financial aid office to see where you're at, because if they can't re-award you that same amount of funding in your senior year or your fifth year, then what are you going to do to supplement that $4,000? Because that's quite a bit of money. So these are questions I would ask the school, and make sure to individually ask each school, because all of their awarding criteria and the way that they do it is going to be different. There's something called the Teach Grant, and I want to caution everybody that the word grant is listed here. However, this grant is connected to a service obligation, which means that for every year you take the grant money, you have to be able to work it back into the system. You do have to sign a contract, and which is the service agreement. You have to say, I'll work in this field and with these types of students. And if you don't do that, then it will turn into an unsubsidized loan, which means interest accrues on it and it's a loan. So I also want to mention that the Teach Grant is not something that every school participates in. For example, CCBC does not participate in Teach Grant. However, Towson University has a robust education program, and they do participate in Teach Grant. So if you're interested in being a teacher, and believe me, we need great teachers working in the field, and you have a strong desire, this would be a good way, again, to help pay for your education, because it is a grant if you are eligible for it and interested in it. So check with the school, see if they have it and what their application process is. And lastly, there's work study. So if you have need, you would check with the school to find out how to apply for work study. Every school is different. So there is a question on the FAFSA that does ask you if you're interested in work study. I believe it says yes, no, not sure. What I would say is that if you're not sure, I would still say yes. And mostly the reason why I always recommend students to do this is because a lot of this money minus the Pell Grant is all first come, first serve. And so the issue with this is that if you say no now, and then later on you change your mind, there may not be any funds to award you. but you can always be awarded the funds and then decline them if you're not interested. So I would check with the school to see how they award work study and what their process is. And they should be meeting the federal guidelines for at least $15 an hour. We do here at CCBC. So again, I would just check with the school to see, and there's some on-campus, off-campus jobs, but check with the school. So we're going to talk about loans now. I think all of you have been hearing all the things that have been going on in the world since COVID kind of slipped its way into our lives and has caused a muck for most of us. However, the student loan debt cancellation, which again, I think a lot of people hear about it through the president of our country, who talks about it pretty frequently. But I want to say one thing before I talk about the loans. You'll see the last bullet says last resort for the private loans, but I'm always, as an aid administrator, am always going to tell you, please don't borrow loans if you don't have to. I know that sometimes we have no choice, and I also know that sometimes we need to find a way to supplement what we owe to the college that we want to go to. But if you can reduce the amount that you're borrowing, I obviously am going to encourage you, especially since the interest rates have skyrocketed from last year to the current year. So if you take a look at the box to the right where it says loan limits and year in school, you'll see how much you can borrow in student loans. There is a very specific cap for how much you can borrow in loans every year that you're in school. So I just want to again caution everybody and just say, that you will probably be at the 7,500 and above amount. But if you don't have to borrow, I would not. Uh, I don't know if all of you are familiar with how student loans work and what they are and what interest rates mean and what level of knowledge you have. But the federal loan program is called the Stafford Direct Loan Program, and under this umbrella there's two types of loans, which you don't get to choose. It's whatever your eligible need in the school awards it to you. But there's two kinds. One is a subsidized, and the other one is unsubsidized, which are the first two bullets under the main Stafford Loan Program bullet. Subsidized loans essentially means that there's no interest on the loan while you're in school. So what does that mean? It means basically if you borrow a loan for $2,000 and then you graduate from your four-year school, 6 months after you graduate, you start repayment. At that time, that same $2,000 loan will still be $2,000. Obviously, once you start the repayment, the interest will kick in based on whatever the interest rate was in the year that you borrowed. Unsubsidized loans, unfortunately, accrue interest while you're in school. So that same $2,000 example we use for subsidized, if you were to use this in the same case, then that $2,000 loan might now be $2,500. The interest rate last year was 3.73%. The interest rate now until June 30th will be 4.99%. So again, every July 1, that interest rate changes. So we don't know what will happen. So I can only tell you the interest rate now. Also, if your parent is interested in borrowing, I should also mention that the subsidized and unsubsidized loans are in the student's name. As long as you have not defaulted on a prior student loan, you would be eligible. There's no credit check that's involved. Parent plus loans do have a credit process. There is a credit worthiness process that is handled by the Department of Education. It is in the parent's name. Parents can borrow up to the cost of attendance minus any other financial aid that the students received. And essentially the interest rate is much higher. I believe the federal law caps Parent Plus loans at 8%. So it can't go any higher than 8%. But of course, there's been a big jump and now the interest rate's gone to 7.54%. And lastly, there are private loans, which are completely based on credit. Typically, students who don't have any type of credit history would need a cosigner. And the last thing I would mention is that the one thing about private loans is that colleges are not required to counsel students on private loans. They have variable interest rates. We won't know, and the fine print in these private loans is what's really important. For example, let's say, for example, you missed a payment, you could have had like a 3% 9% interest rate, but then it might jump to 20%. So these are things that you should take a look at. And depending on your school, they might have relationships with other banks, and they might tell you, like, these are some of the ones that we work with. You really should do your due diligence. You should do your research, make sure to ask a ton of questions. And again, as much as I don't encourage students to borrow loans, I would always pick a federal loan over a private loan. But again, if you have to do it, then make sure that you are really reading through it, ask as many questions, get everything in writing, and work with your school to determine how it's processed, because the school does need to certify a loan. So we talked about federal financial aid. Let's talk about state financial aid. I have this, again, the URL at the top for you. Maryland State Financial Aid is, a lot of people get very confused because they call it MD CAPS, or call it MHEC, or just Maryland State Aid. The Maryland Higher Education Commission is the governing body, where the Office of Student Financial Assistance, which is state financial aid, resides in this state department. And within that state department, um, the state financial aid processing is also connected to their online account system for students, which is called MD CAPS. So as a student, you would create an account, and you can see the middle little box there. It says create your MD CAPS account, and there's the URL listed there. You do need to create an account to apply for any specific grants outside of the EA grant. You will also have to possibly upload documents to them. It just depends on what you're applying for. And I should mention that the state has a pretty strict March 1st deadline for most of their awards. And it doesn't matter if you're transferring. Again, we're going to encourage you to finish your associate's degree here. However, just be aware that you need to check those deadline dates because they are extremely important. Also, when we get to the legislative scholarships bullet, I'll talk about the legislative district box that's to the right of it that says mdelect.net. So you will need to create an account. And again, the reason for that is, as I explained, you will have to complete applications and accept and decline awards and do, all sorts of stuff within your account. The Educational Assistance Grant is something that you're automatically applying for when you complete your FAFSA by the March 1st deadline. So there's no separate application for that. The part-time grant actually is similar to the federal SEOG grant because it's called campus-based funding. Essentially, they give a lump sum of money to the school, and the school awards on their behalf. So here at CCBC, if a student is interested in part-time grant, we ask them to complete our academic works application, and that's how we award part-time grant. Every school is going to be different, so I would make sure to ask those schools how they award their part-time grant funding and if there's any separate application process. And I should also mention the part-time grant is in its name. You can only essentially receive it if you're 6 to 11 credits. Every school deems full-time differently, but typically they're all at 12 credits. So you cannot receive this if you're a full-time student. A wonderful scholarship opportunity that's available to students is the 2+2 transfer scholarship. Depending on your program of study or your major, will essentially determine how much you'll be eligible for. So there is a separate application for this. So complete your FAFSA and then make sure to complete this process when it's available. Now, I will tell you that I do not believe at this time MHEC, I don't think most of their applications for 2023, 2024 is available. I do know that the Maryland State Financial Aid application, which I will talk about in the next slide, is already available for 23-24, but I do not know if all of these are available currently. So I would check that. And if we happen to have questions, I will check it, but I don't believe that they're open at this time. There are a ton of career and occupational based grants and scholarships that are on their website. There's too many for us to review in this presentation. However, if you go to their website, you can see under the financial aid scholarships and grants section, you will see a listing of all of these that are available. And again, there could be separate applications. They might, there could be career obligations, which means you have to sign off on something and say you're going to work in that field for as long as you receive the scholarship. So again, really do your research in this section and see things that you might be interested in applying for. Legislative scholarships are essentially there are two categories under legislative scholarships. So the first thing I'll say is if you don't know your legislative district, or if you're not registered to vote and don't have a voter registration card, you should definitely identify what your legislative district is. And the web address that I have to the right there, mdelect.net, is a great way to identify. You'll just put your street address in and it'll tell you who your senator and or delegates are for your district. If you're not aware, there's typically one senator and 3 delegates that make up every single legislative district. Some districts are interesting and they don't always have 3 delegates, but one senator they have and at least one delegate they have. So I would take a look and see what legislative district you live in and then follow whatever those guidelines are. Now, let me tell you some of the differences between the two. There are very huge differences with how much they can award, but I will tell you for as long as I've worked in financial aid, I have never seen a student receive these astronomical amounts that are listed in this presentation. However, you should always apply. Senatorial scholarships are renewable up to 8 semesters, or in your case, it would be an additional 4 semesters or 2 additional years, but I will encourage you all to apply for those. And again, it's a great way after you've been awarded to continue to receive it. And senatorial scholarships are based on need. Delegate scholarships are not based on need. And then you do need to apply yearly. So there is no renewable element to this. But I'm going to now put a caveat in all of this and say this. Because of the way that the law is written, senators and delegates do things very differently depending on the district they're in. Some senators and delegates want nothing to do with this program, and they give the money to MHEC to award on their behalf. If they do that, it will always be need-based. Some delegates, let's say there are 3 delegates in the district, they may not award individually. So they'll say, you know what, as delegates, we all get together, we award the money out of one pot, and that's how they do their awarding. Now let's talk about how, who to apply, when to apply. This is an election year. So I'm sure most of you have seen on the street tons and tons of signs on all the corners as November is coming up. Some of these senators and or delegates may no longer retain their seat. So I could tell you to go to their website now, but there's really no point because they may not, those applications are not going to be available. But I will tell you if they're seasoned and they happen to re-win their seat, then and they're seasoned, the application's probably on their personal website. And it'll be like a .com website. So if you put in the delegate's name or senator's name and there's a legislative page that's like a state page, that's not where you're going to find this information. You're going to go to their fundraising, essentially their personal website, and you'll find that it'll say scholarship application, for example. And then, again, you're going to have to wait until at least January when most of them will be in office, and then you'll contact their office or look at their website and see if they have this information. And you can always call their office and say, I'm a student, I'm interested in applying. They may email it to you, they might mail it to you, and all of them are different. They'll ask for an application, they might ask for your transcript, they might ask for an essay. Again, every district is different, so I will always encourage all of you to do your research and to identify this information to help you determine what you need to submit and when you need to submit it and who you should be submitting it to. There are tuition waivers that are available to students that might fit a certain category. If you are eligible for these, there's typically a process at each school, just like we have one here at CCBC, but typically it's not a financial aid process. So it's really a process between the registrar's office and the bursar's office or the finance office, whatever the school might call those offices. And they're the ones that would apply that tuition waiver onto your account. Lastly, there's something called Academic Common Market. If you're not aware, the state of Maryland has a relationship, I think, with the Southern Board. And essentially what those areas will do is allow someone that is a Maryland state resident to attend one of the schools in their state and receive in-state tuition rates. But it has to be a certain program. And so if you go to the MHEC website and type in Academic Common Market in the search box on their website, it will take you to this link internally on their website. And then it's going to send you to the Southern Regional Board website, which is where this relationship exists. And then you will be able to pull down the schools and the programs that are available at these respective schools. you could want to go to, like, I'm making this up, the University of Alabama, but it doesn't mean that every program is within this. Or let's say, for example, there's a lot of like marine biology programs in Florida. You would like to attend one of those schools, and that's mostly because we don't offer it here in the state of Maryland. You know, you would have to apply to that school, be admitted to that school. You would apply for this separately, and then it's possible that you could receive in-state rates, even though you're a Maryland state resident. So unfortunately, there's too many caveats and too many programs and too many schools. But I would recommend going onto their website and seeing if it's something that you're eligible for. It could be a wonderful opportunity. Before I move on from the state programs, I just want to briefly mention, I know that we have many students here at CCBC that are considered undocumented, and they are part of the DREAM Act, and they are receiving in-county rates. Um, the state of Maryland, in the last year and a half, has done a lot to assist students in this category, because students that are undocumented typically cannot complete a FAFSA, but the state has created a Maryland State Financial Aid application, or what we call the MISFA. And you can go directly to this page. Obviously, when you go on to um, uh, the MHEC website, you'll see on there that it'll say complete a MISFA instead of completing a FAFSA, and you'll click that link to complete it. Not all the programs at the state are eligible. I've provided a list here. If you still don't know your legislative district to apply for legislative scholarships, you would still need to identify your district, so make sure to do that. You definitely want to make sure your MISFA is completed before March 1st, but each one of these programs might have different deadlines, so you really have to take a look. And just being undocumented is not enough. So sometimes if you don't meet the DREAM Act requirements, or your parents are not filing tax returns, or whatever it might be, you may not be eligible for this. So what I would recommend is to go to the website. I can also provide the link. I did not put the actual URL for this page, but I'll be more than happy to post it in the chat as soon as the presentation is closing, and I will be more than happy to put that in there. CCBC scholarships and grants are an excellent way to help with your tuition and fees cost here at CCBC. I know a lot of you, again, might still be here for another year, another semester. We of course encourage you to apply. The direct link is listed there on the second bullet. You can read more about our scholarships, but we have a lot of scholarships, and of course we encourage you to apply. We always want to award them to as many students as possible. So while you're still here, we still encourage you to apply. Oh, sorry, my mouse got a little crazy. And just to encourage you also, in addition, if you have any questions or need more information, please feel free to come to campus. If you don't want to come to campus, you can email us. Also, you can find most of our information on our website. And also, please learn to use Simon. I will tell you that I know a lot of students, when they come here, we say, did you check your Simon account? And students will say, no, I didn't. And the thing is, here at CCBC, we always tell you it's not that big of a deal. You can always come see us. But when you transfer to the four-year school, you'll find it might be a little more difficult to talk to someone. And they definitely have online systems. So we encourage you to start learning how to use these portals and these dashboards, because it does make a huge difference. And I will say also, here at CCBC, we have My CCBC, and there's all sorts of messages that are posted in there to tell you about all the events and programs and things that are going on in student life, even the transfer group. There's so many things going on, and if you're not checking it, then you're kind of out of the loop, and we want to make sure that you're immersed with the campus as much as possible. So make sure you're checking your email, and again, it'll just get you prepared for when you transfer to the four-year school, because of course these things will still be in play as well there. So some of the things to think about when you're transferring, outside of the fact that we've gone over what's available through the federal and the state government, I should also mention state financial aid is typically, it's meant for you to keep the money here. So you're not going to be able to be like, oh, I got this scholarship and from the state, and I'm going to take it to University of Virginia. I'm making this up. So it's meant for you to stay here. So of course, at the end of the day, we're always going to encourage you to apply to your state schools and to Maryland four-year colleges, because you'll be able to maximize the amount of financial aid you have versus the cost. So when you are transferring, the first thing you really need to do is do some research. Go to their websites, go to the financial aid website, talk with the admissions transfer people. If you haven't spoken to our transfer people, like Courtney and Ann, who have so much information about the deadline dates, early action, early decision, and requirements. And so even though the FAFSA, the state deadline is March 1st, most of these schools you'll see in my second bullet, they have deadline dates way before Valentine's Day. So, and again, if you're doing like an early action, early decision, those deadline dates are even earlier. So again, I'm going to make sure that really do your research, check the deadline dates. Some of the schools may require something called a CSS profile, which is housed through the College Board. This college scholarship service is essentially what it stands for. And a lot of schools may use this profile. It's roughly around 400 colleges and universities in the United States that use it. And the reason for the CSS profile essentially is because schools, the FAFSA only gathers so much information. And so these schools might want additional information before they award you their endowment funding. And so before they'll do that, they really want to make sure you're eligible. So they may ask for additional information. I will say that the College Board has gotten much better about providing fee waivers depending on your income levels. There's some categories that you can also apply for fee waivers. I believe the first request is $25, and if there are any additional schools that need it, it's $16. So again, if you are not sure if the school requires it, one, you can check the school's website. If you can't find it there, you can go to the CSS profile URL I provided for you, and there should be a link right there on the landing page that says list of participating schools. And then when you click, you can sort and filter by school or by state, and that should help you determine if your school requires it. And again, sometimes a lot of schools have financial aid information that they require that you submit to the financial aid office, like copies of tax return transcripts or, separate financial aid application, whatever it might be. You really need to check with each school and see if they require this additional information. And again, by a certain deadline date. And the last thing I'm going to encourage you, I find that when I ask students, do they know how much it costs? Most students don't seem to know how much it costs. And it is a federal law that schools are supposed to publish their costs of attendance. And the cost of attendance is a fancy way of saying a budget. And so when schools post the cost of attendance, it will have the tuition and fees charges, but it will also have other things in there that they think you might incur for that academic year. It doesn't mean you owe that money to the school, but you just really need to know how much it may cost, because that could factor into your decision of attending that school. There are a ton of transfer opportunities for students. I know many of our students that have received the Jack Kent Cooke, which is a big scholarship. And if there are any transfer students listening who are also honor students, you'll find that they also have all this information available as well. There's the Phi Theta Kappa Scholarship. You know what? I forgot to put the updated dates on here. So before I know Courtney or Ann will upload this updated presentation. And of course, obviously it's being recorded, but these deadline dates are inaccurate. So I apologize for that, and I'll make sure to provide an updated a PowerPoint with these dates. But I will tell you, every year I have a lot of trouble with the university system dates. They don't typically have them. The United Negro College Fund, Hispanic Scholarship Fund, they always have those dates, as well as the Jack Kent Cooke Scholarship. I will mention Phi Theta Kappa. We also have that organization here at CCBC, and they can also assist you with identifying any deadline dates. But typically when you apply for these, there are deadline dates, and they might request additional information. There could be recommendation letters that are involved. So again, make sure to read those and make sure to identify what those deadline dates are. And, I'm kind of a nerd, so I will always keep like a spreadsheet. I would encourage you all to do the same thing. We also have partners with many of the schools, and I know, I don't know if Ann has discussed this with a lot, I'm sure she has, about our dual admissions programs that have she's been able to connect with. But we have a lot of those now, and I'm sure that there will be additional incentives with all of these schools in the near future, if not already. But just know there are transfer scholarships available at UB, at Towson, at Stevenson. So again, take a look at these. I've provided the links here for you. We certainly never have enough time to go over all of them, but I would encourage encourage you to take a look at all of this. And I want to mention there's UMBC and also College Park. You really, the transfer coordinator or the transfer admissions person or whoever you're coordinating your efforts with at that other school is really who you should ask these questions to. Most of these scholarships are not awarded out of the financial aid office. Some schools have special scholarship offices, and it might be out of that office, or they might really be awarded out of the admissions office. Now, once you become a student, it is administered by the financial aid office, but essentially it's never awarded initially because it has nothing typically to do with need-based requirements. It's typically based on academics and GPA. For example, UMBC has a PTK award. Well, that has to do with the fact that you're involved with Phi Theta Kappa. So again, to ask these questions, do your research, make sure that you contact them as early as possible so that you can, again, make sure that you're prepared and that you know that your tuition and fees will be paid. Some questions to ask, I would recommend for you to ask to a lot of these schools is, and if you haven't already, and check their website, do you have transfer scholarships? Are they good for 2 years? As I mentioned earlier, I'm very concerned about students who need to take more than 2 years to finish their degree after that they've transferred, whether it's, I know a lot of schools have their own university requirements, and then they make you take like another 12 credits. Well, that might push back what you're doing for another semester or another year. If you're a double major, or if you happen to withdraw from a class, all these things will affect your completion. So make sure you ask, can this be extended for another semester or another year? And obviously at that point you would have to complete another FAFSA for that year that you thought you would have graduated. Also, I would recommend, if you're also thinking about grad school in the long run, is to complete your FAFSA anyway, even if you are not sure you'll be done in that 4th year. Maybe you will be, and then you need to apply to grad school. At least your financial aid stuff will be done at that point. What types of aid is available? Are they scholarships and grants? Is there any fine print? Some of the things that I would always recommend for students to do is to read the fine print on anything you're signing. Please do not sign anything, whether it is on paper or electronically, without reading the fine print. For example, if you receive a merit scholarship, and the merit scholarship says that you have to retain a 3.5 GPA. Well, let's say after your first semester you get a 3.2. Do you lose the scholarship immediately? Do you have a semester to dig yourself out of that hole? Is there an appeal process? These are the kinds of questions you should be asking these schools, admissions office, financial aid office, whoever, or both, about what those procedures are or what will happen. Are you interested in Division I or Division II sports where you might receive a scholarship for athletics, and what happens if you get hurt? Are you interested in being an art major, but then after 1 year, you're like, I don't want to be an art major, but you're there with an art scholarship? Do you lose your scholarship? Do you have to give any of it back? These are questions you really need to make sure you're asking. When you should apply, what are the deadline dates? We talked about the CSS profile, when to complete that CSS profile, and make sure any additional documentation is provided to the school. What is the school code for the FAFSA? There is a search engine in the FAFSA, but sometimes a lot of the schools have multiple school codes, so it's important that you check to make sure you have the right one. Again, we talked about those deadline dates. And lastly, again, when is my FAFSA due at your school? Check each college or university, as I mentioned, make sure to check those deadline dates. Make sure to, I find that a lot of students don't realize that they're being scammed, or if somebody says pay $50 and we'll give you a scholarship listing, don't ever do that. You should not have to pay for anything. These days it's very easy to be scammed, whether it's clicking on a fake link, or I know they love to fish us at CCBC and send random emails to students. So make sure that you are always checking before you submit anything. I will also mention that there's a lot of national websites, and I put a couple here that are the big ones. What I would say is that anytime you apply on a national level, it just means that it's more competitive, right? There's more people applying, but that does not mean that you shouldn't apply. all scholarships are, if you end up getting them, is a wonderful opportunity. For example, Jack Kent Cook is a big scholarship, and I know we've had many CCBC students receive the Jack Kent Cook. So, and that's a huge scholarship. So you should never feel defeated like you won't get anything, but you also should be realistic that sometimes you may apply and you may not be eligible for something. So let me quickly, as I mentioned, I want to provide some additional dates. So I will put that in there. And I know that there was a URL. Oh, I wanted to provide a URL for the MHEC website with the undocumented information. So let me get that right now so that we have it in the presentation. It's this right here. I'm going to put it in the chat. And if for some reason it comes up again, students can obviously, you'll have access to this link. But I just put that up there in the chat. It's mhec.maryland.gov/pages/MISFA-FAQs.ASPX. And again, you can go directly there to get more information about the undocumented information. And the last thing I will do is update my presentation to provide some more updated information about the deadline dates for Jack Kent Cook, Hispanic Scholarship Fund, United Negro College Fund, and the USM transfer scholarships. And did we have any questions?
No questions, but I must say, this is a lot of fantastic information, and I can see our students coming back again and again at different points in their process to make sure that they're checking off the items, and especially those questions to ask. Thank you for going into depth as you did, because those are the questions students don't know they don't know yet. And
Right.
So getting them prepped is the best thing we can do. So thank you so much, Nasim, for being with us today and being such a transfer champion.
Of course, I'm always here to help, and I wish the students the best of luck. Even though there are students, they don't need luck. I know they'll do the work. So just stay strong and steadfast. You can do it.
Great advice. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.